ma'am. Good afternoon, one and all. I welcome you all to the third session of our 5-day online ATAL, FDP Innovation and Acquisition of IPR Rights. I invite Dr. Asha, Assistant Professor, IUCIPRS, to introduce the resource person.
Thank you. We have with us Dr. Sam Thomas, Professor of School of Management Studies, Cochin University of Science and Technology. He holds an engineering degree from NIT Calicut, an MBA from IIM Bangalore, and PhD from Cochin University. He has more than 20 years of experience in teaching and training and 6 years in industry. He is the director of CITIC, that is a technology business incubator of CUSAT, which has more than 50 startup companies. He is also a mentor, member of board of studies and faculty in many universities and autonomous colleges. He has handled a series of training programs on project management, entrepreneurship, and data analysis for corporates, academia, and professionals. He has more than 40 publications in international and national journals and was also an international visiting scholar to Western Michigan University, USA, and James Cook University, Australia. With these words, over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Asha. Good afternoon, Dr. Ritesh and participants. So I think it's my privilege to be part of this 5-day ATAL FDP program. I hope I'm audible to you. Any problem, anytime, please feel to interrupt me. I was told, rather I was astonished to find more than 100 participants across India joining this program. So again, it's an honor to be one among you. IPR Center has been organizing a range of programs in the field of intellectual property rights for everyone from laymen to scholars. And this is one of such privileged programs. Now, my interest in this program is more from an innovation perspective, because I'm not a lawyer. As introduced, I work with a lot of startups in CUSAT, a lot of students and researchers who are trying to convert their project into a commercial venture. And my interaction with many of them, I mean, probably is the backbone of today's discussion. So I may discuss for an hour or so, and then we can have a discussion if you feel like. So let me get started. I will share my slides and we'll get going. I hope the slide is in the full screen mode.
Yes, sir. It's okay. In the presentation mode.
This is always a technology compatibility issue. Like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, thank you so much. So as mentioned, we will just look at IP and innovation. It's a very interesting relationship between these two, and some of my thoughts on this. Now, as mentioned, some of you may have a law background. Some of you may be like me, coming from other disciplines. So let's get some of those basics right to ensure that we are all on the same path. And now let's look at some of these terms like intellectual property. I'm sure you had some introduction. Very quickly, when I talk about IP, I mean 4 basic things, what we call the copyrights, the trademark, the trade secrets, and the patents. As some of you may know, this intellectual property can be anything that is creation of mind. It is all the product of creativity, derived from the basic creativity principles, where essentially we say that everybody is creative, but the level of creativity could vary. The way creativity manifests also can vary. And the reason why somebody is creative, the motive can also be vary. And also what opportunity your creativity presents to you will also vary. So basically meaning there is nothing called an ideal kind of creativity. That is a fundamental creativity principles, which also means that we need a range of protection, a range of parameters on which an intellectual property can be assessed. And that is why we have 4 of these basic modes. Copyright, where as an author, as a writer, you want your articles to be copyrighted, you want your songs, your artistic work to be protected through a copyright. Then we have the trademarks, which could be, I mean, if you're a commercial venture, that is something that you normally use to protect your brand, because brands are something so important to a commercial venture, because all the effort that we do in management, in marketing is basically about brand building, right? So essentially all your symbols and the brand equity that you create over a period of time through your very efficient advertising and promotional activities has to be protected, and you have the trademark protection available to you. Then of course you have the trade secret, something unlike other 3 mechanisms like the copyright and the trademarks and the patents. Trade secrets refer to something that you do not want to really disclose, but it's there. It could be a secret source, right? How Coca-Cola makes its cola, it's a trade secret, the kind of unique combinations, that is the USP, and there is nothing in it. So you want that to be protected, even if you license this to others, even when you have a lot of employees working in that department, you do not want this to be leaked out to somebody. So you have a trade secret protection available to you. And the most important of this IP that we talk about with respect to innovation, as you all know, would be patents. Patents define the intellectual property that we all normally refer to, because other 3 are more of a different nature, as I said, designed to protect or meant for some other forms of creativity. But in patents, we are actually researchers and academicians like you and me. You're more interested in the patent form, which is the way we actually protect our inventions. So patents offer you a unique way of protecting your innovations, provided they are satisfying those 3 conditions: novelty, non-obviousness, and usefulness. Right? Many of you may know still, for the beginners, novelty would mean that this has to be something new. This has to be something new that is not there already. It has to be invented by you, right? If it is already there and you accidentally caught hold of it, you don't get a patent because it is not novel. Non-obvious, something that can be easily derived from an existing product, something that isn't just a very logical extension of an existing thing, will not get a patent because again it is non-obvious. And finally, very important from a commercial perspective, but a very controversial term actually, useful. Right? Who defines usefulness is always a debate. But the law says that unless it is useful to somebody, you make a chemical compound through your experiments and you have no idea what that compound and why it can be used for. Well, it is a unique compound and you have developed it through your experiment. But if you have no usefulness to be demonstrated, you don't get paid. So you will apply for a patent if you get those 3 elements satisfied: novelty, non-obviousness, and the usefulness. You can apply your intention. I mean, your invention can be protected under patent. This is what we mean by intellectual property. So that was the first part of the title, a role of IP in innovation. So first we looked at what an IP is very quickly. And as I said, from morning to evening, world over, you are surrounded by IPs. You have companies protected by IPs. All these brands, all these products that we talk about will have something or the other out of the 4 formats that we talked about. Copyrights or trade secrets or trademark or patents, built into it. So this is basically the intellectual property. The second part would be what we call innovation, IP in innovation. Now, when I talk about innovation, there are a few terms that are very, very close to this, what we call invention. And then there is another term that is very close to invention, that is discovery, right? So very quickly, can one of you just tell me the difference between discovery and invention, and then some other person between invention and innovation, just to get the basics right. Can some of you just tell me discovery versus innovation, invention? just to ensure that you don't fall off to sleep. I don't fall off to sleep.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Sir, discovery which is not
Can you speak a little louder? It's not really audible.
okay. Sir, discovery is something which is not yet discovered.
No, can you just repeat? I think there is an audio problem.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, discovery is basically which is not yet discovered by anyone.
Discovered by?
Which is not yet discovered by anyone.
Okay.
An invention is which is created by someone for the first time, which is not exist anymore.
Okay. Somebody would like to add? Someone would like to add to this definition of discovery versus invention? Anyone?
Sir, I like to add.
Yeah, please.
But, sir, if you are finding something which is not already there,
Uh-huh.
you can call it as invention. If you are finding something which is already there, you can call it as discovery.
Very good. Very good. So,
add creativity to your invention, you can call it as innovation.
so you add creativity to what?
Invention.
Then you say you get innovation.
Yeah.
Okay, partly true. Yeah. Okay. Anyone who would like to build?
Sir, discovery is gaining knowledge of or ascertaining the existence of something previously known or unknown, unrecognized things. And the
Okay.
invention is making or creating something which did not exist before it was made or invented.
Okay. And then innovation?
Innovation.
Okay, fine.
All inventions
Are innovations.
would help to innovate new things.
Okay, fine. Okay. Let's hear one or two more views.
Yeah, may I, sir?
Please, please. Why not?
Yeah. Discovery can be accidental, sir.
Okay.
And maybe invention, maybe with some effort when we want to, for example, we are trying to find this cure for COVID and all,
Okay.
or something maybe. And innovation, when you add some value addition or some creativity, it can be termed as innovation.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Fine. So more or less, there is a kind of consensus. Okay. For want of time, I will move on. All your definition with respect to discovery versus invention is more or less correct. All of you agreed. Discovery is you are actually finding out something that is already there. Like for example, we say Columbus. We don't say Columbus invented America. We said Columbus discovered America, right? Or Marco Polo discovered China. We don't say invented China because it was there even before that. You are the first person to notice that and probably make a record of that. So discovery is basically, again, it can be through various methods and you get credit for being the first person to make a record of it. But it is not that you made it. Like, we say fire was not invented. Like Homo sapiens millions of years ago. I mean, they discovered fire because they found that when lightning happens, when lightning struck trees, the tree caught fire and fire was there. Or when a big rock was falling on another rock because of frictional force, fire was being generated. So fire was discovered by, we say, humans way back, let's say, 3 million BC and all. So that is a discovery. So let's be very clear that discoveries cannot be patented. You may be credited with, being the person to find that, but you don't get rights on that because you only discovered. So that is why we talk about a lot of natural therapies, natural products which are already there. You may be the person who actually bringing it to the scientific notice to the world, but then it is already there, so you don't get patents for that. Inventions are essentially, as you rightly said, where they are made by you. They are the creations of you. An innovative, a new a product or a composition or a process that you made, you generate. Like as you rightly said, COVID vaccine is an invention. Electric bulb is an invention, right? So when you are inventing something, you get the credit for being the owner of that property that you just generated, and that is what we talk about in intellectual property. Now, when it comes to innovation, there is something that you actually missed. Somebody said creativity added to invention is innovation, but it is actually creativity which results in invention. So creativity is manifested not in innovation, creativity is manifested in invention. If there is no creativity, there is no invention. As I told you earlier, for you to call something an invention, you have to be creative because you're producing something new, novel, right? Otherwise, it is not there. So then what is the step from invention to innovation? Right? Innovation in very simple terms is an invention put to commercial use. Right? So if the moment you put an invention to a commercial application for the use of people, for the use of mankind, for the use of world, right, that becomes an innovation. That becomes an innovation. Right? For example, as we said, the fire is a discovery. Right? But later humans made small gadgets to generate fire. Like, they made small devices through frictional forces. You can actually rub one rock against another. You can generate fire whenever you want. Earlier, they were just watching fire being generated by lightning and, big thunderstorms and all that. But then here later, people found a method of controlling fire, basically meaning that generating fire as and when you like. That was an invention. So the tools that they made for generation of fire could be called an invention. Even the modern tools that we have, like a stove or a cigar lighter, which are all generating fire, they are all inventions because they help you to generate fire at your will, to control fire as you want. But then just because you are able to generate fire, which is an invention, doesn't mean that you are innovating. Assume that fire had no commercial application. Nobody wanted to use fire. Suppose that fire was seen more like an unwanted commodity, like floods or something. Then this invention has no value. Correct? When somebody found that fire has a lot of applications, somebody found fire can be used for cooking, right? So that was one of the first applications of fire people invented, right? You can cook meat and then it becomes tastier and easier to eat. Humans discovered rather than eating raw meat. So one application of fire. Then somebody found that fire can be used to melt your metals. And so that could be very effective in making your tools, especially the hunting tools were one of the initial inventions people had. I mean, when you look at the history of mankind. And they found that fire has an application in actually making better quality hunting tools, because fire can be used after creation of, when you talk about the Iron Age, not the Stone Age, Iron Age days, where they found that iron can be melted and converted to sharp devices, that it had an application. So the moment fire had applications identified, we started calling fire, I mean, this as an innovation. So the person who found this application for fire would be credited with innovating with fire. He may not have invented. So an ideal scenario would be you invent something and you innovate that. That is an ideal scenario, right? The best example that comes to me would be, I mean, one of the greatest inventors in the history of mankind, Thomas Alva Edison. Thomas Alva Edison has made something around 1093 inventions, patented inventions, right? One of the highest ever in the history, right? So, I mean, he from the childhood onwards, he was inventing. I mean, probably he had that kind of a knack for doing something completely different. So he was inventing things one by one, right? Notable, I mean, most popular being the electric bulb. Though there are some people say that, I mean, it was not just he along with somebody else he invented. It doesn't matter. He's credited with that. I mean, the patent is in Edison's name, right? So he invented, we say Thomas Alva Edison invented that. But then he did not stop just there. He got the patent in 1880 for bulb. And then what he did was immediately he started a company called General Electric. He collected funds, he mobilized a group of researchers to work along with him, right? And approached financial institutions and got a lot of funding. And he started this company, which actually started commercializing his invention. So this team of smart people he assembled under GE, which is continuing to be one of the world's most respected companies, right? GE was actually founded by Edison with an objective of commercializing his invention. So he was lucky to make the best out of his invention. He commercialized them. He made the maximum money out of his invention because, I mean, he had that knack for innovation. So Edison was an inventor as well as an innovator. But not everybody will have the luxury of being both. Ideally, we should have the luxury of being both. But it's easily said than done. Right? We also have n number of case studies where we say the inventor made no money out of their invention. It was probably somebody else. Like one of the classic cases would be what we call the post-it, sticky notes. All of us use this sticky notes that you attach to a place, you make write notes and attach to a wall, then you detach it and again probably can make corrections and attach it again, attach, detach, kind of a thing, right? This is called, this was actually, this was popularized, made by the company called 3M, but 3M was not the inventor of this technology. In fact, it was invented accidentally by another person who was making a very super strong glue for a purpose, something like your Fevikwik, kind of a very strong adhesive. But he found that he tried different combinations, but he found that whatever combinations he made, it was not permanently sticking to a place. It was coming out after some time, like, just like what we call the detachable glue, right? And so he was so upset and he just abandoned his invention. And probably another person, it says another person was working in the lab and he thought this may have a commercial application. And he actually converted that into this sticky notes, right? Where you put it in the paper and the paper can be attached to a place without damaging the surface. You can detach it after some time, right? So that actually was the innovation. So the inventor never got any credit, any money for this innovation. Similarly, another product that comes to my mind is mosquito repellent. Mosquito repellent also was an accidental abandoned invention. Again, a chemical that was the inventor was trying to develop a compound for a completely different purpose. It never happened, right? But then one of his assistants noticed that whenever that compound is there in a room, mosquitoes do not come near to that, right? So it was his idea probably to convert that into what we call a mosquito repellent product, like the good nights that we use today, right? And that is an innovation. So if you are lucky like Edison, where you are able to convert your invention to an innovation, you are able to commercialize and make the best out of that. But sometimes you are not able to do that. You may not really understand the value of your invention and probably give it away to somebody else, right? And that somebody may make a lot of money in that process. Sometimes you may not do it out of ignorance because you never valued that invention. Sometimes it may be a generosity where you may think that, okay, let it be useful to the society. I don't want to do that either way. But right, so that any of this can happen. So let's be very clear. Discovery is basically trying to find something that is already there. You only get credit for identifying that. Invention is your product of your creativity. You created it, and innovation happens when you actually put it to the right commercial use. Right? Like for example, as an umbrella, as you see in that picture, like you may design an umbrella and use it as an umbrella, or you may invert it and use it as a water storage place, and that is an innovation, right? So innovation is the next step to invention. So as we discussed, so innovation can be thought of invention plus commercialization, and it is a commercialization that is bringing life to your invention, and then it becomes an innovation. So it is the invention that actually gets protected by the intellectual property rights. If you ask your IP people, they will say you cannot protect your innovation, you can protect your invention, because that is the product of your creativity. That is the product of your intellect. Something that came from your thoughts, your ideas, and your insights, your action, your research. You have generated something. And that asset that you generated, your intellectual asset, gets protected under intellectual property. It becomes an IP when you protect it legally. So the moment you protect it, it is something like you have a piece of land finally registered in your name. The moment that it is registered in your name, it becomes valuable. The value can be attributed to you, right? Otherwise, it's just a piece of land till you register it in your name, right? If it is not registered in your name, you cannot enforce any encroachment in your land. So innovation is invention plus commercialization. And the moment you get your invention protected through IP, the equation becomes innovation equal to IP plus commercialization. So just, re-looking at the title of the topic, the role of IP in innovation, I am sure this single equation should tell you what is the role of IP in innovation. Innovation is you are bringing in commercialization on your IP. Correct? But then, just because you have an IP on something, as I said, did you innovate? Or anything that is patented, will that be commercializable? Answer is obviously no. As I said, as you saw in the previous slide, they are two different things. IP is one thing, commercialization is another. When they come together, it becomes a very, very strong winning combination. But it's not necessary that they are always together. You can have IP without commercialization and commercialization without IP also. They're fine. You have a number of examples where we have both the cases. The first case, you have an IP without commercialization. You have any number of examples, right? Because most of us, the teachers, the academicians who are actually, of late when companies also have started filing and gaining patent, but in the initial days, patents were all supposed to be part and parcel of academicians, right? The researchers who used to actually get patents. If you look at American scientists, American academicians, most of them will have patents. Just like we talk about papers, they talk about patents, how many patents they own, right? But how many patents are actually commercialized, resulting in innovation? What would be a guess? Can somebody guess what percentage of patents get commercialized? Any guess? What percentage of patents or inventions have moved to innovations? Inventions are counted through patents. As I said, if you think it's a good invention, probably would have patent. So your number of patents representing number of inventions. And if they are commercialized, they have become innovation. So what percentage of them would have made to the innovation stage? What is your feel? Somebody says 25%, 1%, 2%, 15 out of numbers. Good, okay. Not completely, but some people are not very sure. Generally we say this number is approximately less than 10%. Some people say 5%, 8%, etc. But we have the thumb rule called the less than 10. Right? Why do you think this number is much less than 10? What could be the reason? Because less than 10, too small a percentage. Like all the hype that we have about patents and about IP as the custodian of all your inventions, right? And a mechanism designed to protect invention, but then suddenly you find that not even 10%. Lack of funds, lack of awareness, funding issues, yes, right? Funding issues, etc., etc. Anything more? Either you can type or speak. Most of you feel it is funding. Now, if it is funding, yes, definitely funding is an issue. Because most of you probably are looking at yourself because you think if I am given a lot of funds, I can take it to a final product and take it to the market. True. Because the patents only represent the initial stage of a new commercializable idea. You have only demonstrated the basics. The tip of the iceberg is seed. Now, for you to convert that to a full-fledged product, commercially saleable product, you need a lot more funds. So definitely fund is a concern. Is there anything? Not one factor, so many affect this, lack of knowledge, etc. Lack of knowledge, I do not know. But one thing that we many times we are worried about is the kind of complete disconnect between the researcher and the industry, the researcher and the market is normally seen as the biggest reason why patents are not converted to innovations. Individual level, what you said is true. If as an individual, if I want to commercialize my patent or my invention, I need a lot of funds. But why is that industry is not coming after me to buy my patent and then commercialize? That is another way of actually making money, right? When I say patents being commercialized or converted to innovation, it doesn't mean that the inventor has to necessarily do that. Not necessary. You can always sell it to a 3M. You can always sell it to let's say AG, you can always sell it to any of those companies in your field, who in turn will, buy or license your patent, and they can actually make millions and then share a part of that. Even 1% of $1 billion business could be a huge money for you. And one major reason why even many times the industry is not interested in many of the patents that we generate is that many of these patents are purely academic in nature, right? And that basically happens because, as I said again, in India especially, there is a lot of disconnect between the industry and the academia, industry and the research. We do fundamental research, they are more interested in the applied research. One of the greatest attributes of Edison, again, we refer to Edison as one of the greatest inventors, is that when he looks at a new possible invention, or rather when he starts thinking of that, the first thing that will come to his mind is a commercialization. Or when his team of smart researchers that he assembled in GE, when they present ideas to him, he said the patenting is secondary. For him, commercialization was the first. So all the ideas which do not have a commercial potential, he will say, I'm not interested, right? At least he should, I mean, there's no guarantee, but he should have some chance of making it big in the market. Otherwise, let's not pursue that idea. So the kind of filtering happens even at the stage of idea. So you are not accumulating patents just for the sake of it. You are accumulating patents with a very clear intention of future commercialization. If that is not happening, you will get patent, but then, probably it is never commercially viable. You may have a completely unique way of making a new product, but the cost of making that product could be 10 times the cost of an existing product. So you will get patent for your new product, but nobody will make it because you have much cheaper versions available. So you know that this kind of a costly product will never sell in the market. But being a completely new composition, you get patent, but nobody is going to touch it. So these kind of things can happen. So first we have to get, when we talk about innovation, like when we talk about innovation, as we said, because these two elements, patent and commercialization. If you are into innovation, like as I said, I spark with startups, I always ask this question. When researchers want to commercialize, convert their ideas, I ask them, what is your first love? Are you more excited by the patent part of innovation? Are you more excited by the commercialization part of your innovation? That is a money-making part of your innovation. Both can be fine. I mean, I don't say anything is bad. Making money is never bad, right? So if you are more worried about the commercialization, like starting a startup or entrepreneurship, etc., then we have to be probably looking at it slightly different. Because commercialization, there is no single rule for commercialization. We call levels of commercialization. Like we normally say, there are 3 levels of commercialization possible when you are looking at a commercial venture. There are 3 models which are possible. The first model is called adoption, which means replicate something that is already there with minimal changes. Right? Most of your MSMEs, the micro, small, medium enterprises in this country, work on an adoption model. Right? You have a textile mill, I start a textile mill here. You have one in Jaipur, I talk to you, and probably I think, oh, what you are doing in Jaipur, I can do it in Cochin, I start here. Right? You have a factory, I also have a factory. You make hollow bricks, I also make hollow bricks. We can all serve because there's a huge market, right? You have a restaurant, I also start a restaurant in Cochin, and I also make a lot of money if I do a good restaurant in Cochin. A restaurant in Bangalore is no competition to me. So I find that a Bangalore restaurant based on a theme is making a lot of money. I just replicate that in Cochin, the same setup, right? And I also make a lot of money in Cochin, correct? So, I mean, so this is called adoption. So you have any number of examples. You may not become a billionaire, but you make enough money to survive and live, and that for that adoption is good enough. But then the risk of you infringing into somebody's IP is very high there, because as I said, when you are replicating a Bangalore restaurant theme in Cochin, you have to ensure that the theme or the symbols they have, the trademarks are all not protected. Otherwise, using them straight away here could give you trouble. But most of these cases, most of the adoption cases, MSME cases, there is nothing unique about what they do. So you can easily copy that and replicate it here. When it comes to adoption, you are actually talking about the next level. That is where a slighter, I mean, higher level of, innovation happens. You are copying somebody's model, but major changes. You are probably rewriting rules to suit the local requirement. And that could be very successful. For example, if you look at Flipkart, one of India's most successful startups in the e-commerce space. Flipkart, we know, it was never original, right? The two IIT graduate Bensal and Bensal, who worked with Amazon in US for many years after their IIT, right? Get to know how the tricks of the trade, and they started the Amazon in India, and they called it, they could not obviously call it Amazon, so they called it Flipkart. And Flipkart was not the first e-commerce venture in India. There were many others, but they had a lot of trouble. They had a lot of problems handling, the logistics and the supply chain part of it. And those kind of concerns, these guys had good grip, being there, with an engineering background and working with the supply chain of Amazon in US. So they could very easily do that, recreate that in India, and became a huge success story. Correct? So you may not find anything new there from an invention perspective in any of those adoption cases, like all these education labs that we find today, thanks to Byju's app, which has become India's most valuable startup today with 15 billion American dollars, right? Which is something close to 1 lakh crore rupee Indian value. There are n number of education labs which are being sold now. I don't know about other parts in Kerala. At least those who watch TV, every 5 minutes you have an education lab, right? Being advertised for CBSE, ICSE, Kerala State, etc., etc. Right? But you can do that because Byju doesn't have any IP in any of these areas, right? It was a very age-old model of converting your textbooks into digital format and then being sent it across to students online, right? So that is also fine as long as you're not infringing onto somebody's rights, no problem. And the third is what we call invention-based commercialization, where you are inventing something new, like the COVID vaccine. Pfizer invented COVID vaccine, Pfizer patented COVID vaccine, Pfizer commercialized COVID vaccine, and is making a lot of. That is the highest level of commercialization. So it is not necessary that when we talk about commercialization, it has to be an invention-based commercialization, which is not easy at all. If you look at commercialization successes across the globe, just like I talked about, only 10% of the patents are converted to commercially successful ventures. I should say only 10% of the commercial successful ventures are also derived from invention. 90% of the commercially successful ventures never had a patent to back them up. They were never the originators. It was never a novel idea. Yes, they may have a patent, improvement patent, but the idea was never this. The concept was never this. Facebook was never the first social media in the world, nor was Google the first search engine in the world, right? But they were the most commercially successful search engines and the social media applications, because it was a different issue. I mean, actually, they never invented it. They actually adapted it, learning from the mistakes of others. They just reinvented or improved the existing product and became hugely successful. So as I told you earlier, please note that they are not necessarily connected to each other, but an ideal marriage would be between an IP and a commercialization. And as I said, then there are no holds barred. You become hugely successful, right? But even if it doesn't happen, you can have patent by itself as an academician. If it gives you a lot of satisfaction when you say that I have 2 patents to my credit, that itself is an achievement. Or if you're more worried about commercialization, you don't have to wait till you invent something new and then commercializing it. You can get going with your commercialization part. Like as I said, like the Google and all did, Larry Page and all did, they start the web engine. That process improved the search algorithm, improved the interface, improved the speed, right? And they become more successful than the originator, Alta Vista, right? So the inventor need not be necessarily the best player or the most commercially successful player in the market. So, so as I said, the biggest challenge that we face here would be when you talk about an IP or when you file an IP for your invention, most of the time you're not very sure about the value of that IP. because you are haunted by this 90% rule that 90% of the patents fail to make it to innovation stage. So you're not very sure, should I be, going ahead with my commercialization? Should I be just stopping with IP, etc.? Because especially in our parlance, academicians, universities, we get IP for a very, very early stage invention. Too, early or primitive to call it a commercially viable product or an idea. And to show that you need a huge amount of money. And as you rightly said, but to get that huge amount of money, it could be a difficult. So as an inventor, as an academician, you may have three options. The first option is probably apply for more of academic funding, more funds, and continue further research. That is the best possible option. This, if we can get some funds from your research labs, your research projects. Because the moment, as I normally we say, a basic patent, suppose it fetches you X rupees. The moment you are able to demonstrate through a proof of concept, it becomes 2x. The moment you develop it, your working product, it becomes 5x. It becomes the first working model, it becomes 10x, right? The value doubles or quadruples or becomes huge. So every step that you make pushing this, your initial invention in this path of innovation piece. Otherwise, people may not be just excited. Recently, me and Dr. Atish spoke to a researcher, a chemistry teacher who claims to have invented a new chemical in a product which she says has a lot of applications, cancer treatment, etc., etc. But then the word out there is not exactly convinced. You may need more proof, right? But then to get that proof, she says she has no interest or money or anything to do that because that was a PhD project. So she was just writing to a lot of people asking for, asking whether they are interested. But unfortunately, given the many times the quality of the PhD thesis that we have in India, unfortunately, many of the companies don't seem to be very excited about an PhD thesis being such a very, very valuable, finding, right? So then they ask you to first apply for an IP. That is a first acid stage. And IP itself is a costly process when you try to do it by yourself without any funding support or help from an agency. That itself is a costly process. So many people hesitate, right? Many people say that anyway, I got my PhD, why should I bother, right? So some universities, they fund IP, but then they do that, right? So, but the point, if possible, we'll have to push it for further validation. Any level of validation that we do will be an added advantage. The next best option could be, if that is not, you reach through a research, you reach up to a stage, you cannot take research funds to take it to the market, is never possible. Then you may have to look at this option of licensing that technology or rather selling it to a third party. Whether you license it or give it for royalty or whatever, effectively you are losing control on that. It's more like, SA. Big companies will not allow, unless you are a Nobel Prize winner and all, they will not actually come to you and ask you for a 50-50 sharing agreement and all. It never happens. They may give an offer and most probably they may say we will buy it. Or they will insist that we should have an exclusive 20-year license, right? So again, that depends on to what extent your product is foolproof, to what extent you are demonstrated through your research, the applications, to what extent is going to be a hot product. Based on that, again, it's a negotiation. You may negotiate a good deal. This is more like a technology transfer. You're actually transferring it completely to a third party. The best of your invention comes when you are starting your own company or with your friends and a group of people together, you start a spin-off or start your own company where you decide that you are going to commercialize your venture. In QSAT, at least we have 4 or 5 startups who are actually working on commercializing their own invention. They already taken IP and then they are full-time into it with their family support and personal money and money collected through different grants and funds. They are actually trying to push it further. And that is the best possible option if you want to realize the best of commercialization possibilities for your invention, right? But then again, we have to be very, very clear. For you to be successful commercially with your venture, it is not as easy as getting an IP. When you get an IP, it is only 20% of the road crossed. When I say If you look at the full path of commercialization, IP is only 20% of your journey completed. You have to ask yourself whether you have the enough ammunition to complete the remaining 80%, to complete the task of innovation, to call yourself an innovator. Otherwise, you just stop with an invention. The 5 things that should come together, I will say: idea, team, business model, funding, and timing. You have to get these 5 things right if you have to convert your IP to an innovation, adding commercialization. Very quickly, funding. Funding, all that it means that, I mean, for example, like, if you make a square wheel like this, you may get a patent. Correct? If you're able to, I mean, obviously, probably the first time in the world somebody made a square wheel is novel. It is not so obvious, but then you may struggle to show usefulness of this. But I mean, your patent office is not a collection of Nobel Prize winners and top IQ people. Many times you should be able to fool them by writing something and showing some usefulness. Probably you may finally get your patent sanction. Correct? And but then, so you can call yourself a patent on a wheel, and the story stops there. You will not be able to attract any money. You will not be able to attract any investor, anyone who is willing to collaborate with you, because it's not a market-driven idea. So you got a patent, which is a product which is supposed to be solving a problem. And if that problem is not relevant to the market, then obviously the product that is solving that problem also will have no tails. Right? And one of the major reasons why startups fail, why many of these commercialized attempts fail, is basically this. As I told you earlier, the research again shows, world over, the research shows that more than 50% of the failures can be attributed to the commercialization attempts fail mainly because the idea was of no use to the market. It may be of interest to academicians, it may be of interest to researchers, but the market may have no interest in that. Correct? So in that case, again, like, I mean, you may have a big failure coming your way. Big failure coming your way. Many of your AI products, many of your biometric products, right? Many of them, you still have a problem crossing the threshold because market is many times very skeptical about some products, which you may think it is something very, very fancy, but then market feels other way. So if you think that your invention has a USP, USP meaning a unique selling proposition, USP, over and above the existing product. When I say remember USP, it is a unique selling proposition. It is not a unique feature. You would have got a patent or an invention because there is something unique about your product. But that unique feature of your product is not necessarily a selling proposition. So unless it is a unique selling proposition, your product will get a patent, but will not sell in the market. And that selling proposition has to be of interest to the market, either in terms of an improved feature that people are looking at, or it reduces cost, like the Chinese mobile. You are able to offer all features of an iPhone at 20% cost of an iPhone. Market is interested. Correct? Or you are able to come out with a new iPhone, which is much, much better than an existing iPhone. There is a market. Or you compete on some other parameters, like, as I said, the BYJU'S, where, I mean, you may say that the way you present, the way you present the content to a school kid, that is different. That is the parameter. Or I have a startup here who is making, LED bulbs, which is a very common product. Everybody makes LED bulbs, and 100 companies make LED bulbs. There is nothing to differentiate. There is nothing different with the cost also. But he says that I will offer 5-year warranty, which means a lot of people are interested because nobody is offering 5-year. Maximum you get a warranty for a bulb is only 3 years. So people may say, oh, why not experiment? If somebody is offering 5 years, that is his confidence in his product. He says that it will not fail for 5 years, right? So other parameters. So unless you are able to attach something that is valuable by market your idea, it is involved. Another big problem I find with the inventors today is that they are not very comfortable working in teams. Because there are a lot of concerns about people talking about your product. Many times in presentations, people are so afraid that somebody will copy your idea and run away. So you all want to do it by yourself. right? Or your very close friend, you and your research guide and probably a close research associate in the project team. 3 of you will maximum work together. It never works. Invention, yes, the best team for invention would be have similar minded people work together. When you have people of same wavelength, same interest, same idea, same thinking, when they work together, probably an invention will happen. For example, if you are looking at a technological invention, there is no point adding me to the team because I'm a management person. I will not be able to do anything, from to the invention. But when it comes to innovation, the biggest curse would be that you have a very similar minded people working in that. You need completely different type of people. People are good in planning, people are good in execution, people are good in marketing. Those kind of people should come. And many inventors are not very comfortable. So are you able to make the right team? As I said earlier, one of the biggest success stories of Edison is attributed to the kind of team that he assembled under GE. A good collection of financiers, marketeers, researchers, they all came together under this banner called General Electric Company, which marketed and sold their products, right? So that also ensured that the inventions are in line with the industry requirement. It is not that you invent something and then try to market it. Rather, the marketeers that will feed you ideas and then you try to invent based on the ideas. So because it's never a linear process, it is always a non-linear process. The invention model, the linear invention models are all gone for a toss. All innovation model that we talk about today are all non-linear model where it's a bike and forth. Then of course the business model, which is again a major weakness of inventors. They are not at all comfortable. But unless you are very sure how you are going to make money out of your invention, you will never make money. Are you going to actually after you demonstrate what is that you're going to do? Are you comfortable licensing it to others? Are you going to make your own manufacturing setup? How are you going to distribute? A lot of questions will have to be answered if you have to convince somebody that this will succeed. Then the funding, of course, many of you are talking about funding as one of the major concerns, right? Major concerns as a major concern. No easy answers, but you'll have to start somewhere. If you really want to commercialize your invention, you have to start all by yourself. What we call the bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is fund through personal sources. You, your family, right? Your friends, they all fund you in the beginning stages, what we call the bootstrapping. Then you may approach someone who is excited about your idea and they will give you funds as part of sharing ownership, what they call the angel investors, and then the venture capitalists. You may take some bank loans. Crowdfunding is where you collect money through a range of sources, individuals, like it is becoming a big issue now in Kerala, where for a very small purpose, everything from a treatment to higher studies to, making a movie, you ask for crowdfunding, correct? But it is actually a very good source. If you have your legal homework done properly, you can definitely raise money through crowdfunding. And then of course, there are grants and scholarships and research projects available. So funding is of course a concern that we many times have with respect to this, right? So if you look at the path of profitability for an invention, is a long journey. It is not an easy task at all, correct? Because in the beginning, when you have invented something, there is no commercial potential for that at that point of time. And you pump in a lot of money into that, what we call the seed stage. That is where you need support from the technology business incubators like us. In your own campuses, in your own colleges, you may have incubators who will offer you a lot of advantages. A place where you can sit and work very cost effectively. It will not cost you anything. It will have the ambience of an ecosystem which will support you, like in a campus. For example, IIT Chennai has an excellent incubator where they throw open all facilities of IIT Chennai to this incubator. So very cost effectively, you can do your testing, you can get consulting from your professors, you can make your team from the campus. So those kind of things become so important in the initial stages, right? And then you convert that to a proof of concept, POC as they call it, and then it is a product journey, right? Your minimum viable product MVP, to a working prototype to a final product, and then slowly you start picking up, and then it is a sharp growth if things go well. And you need different types of people to be joining you, as I said earlier. Initial stages could be your friends and family, then it is followed by your angel investors and seed money. Then you have the VCs joining you, private equity, hedge funds, loans, and finally IPO. For example, if you look at companies like Zomato, which is again one of the largest Indian startup companies, which had their public IPO last week. Paytm, another darling of Indian startup system, is also one of the largest Indian startup companies. Again, they are also collecting going forward. These companies are all valued at probably billions of US dollars, something around 1 lakh crore rupee Indian value. So big money games there. So there is no limit to it. But the moment you cross this threshold, reached here and cross this threshold, then it is all going up usually. Now, so how important is that you protect your invention in this process? Suppose you want to, these options, you want to keep it alive. As I said, you have multiple options. You can do it all by yourself by starting your own venture, or you can license it to somebody who will make it, for you. So if you, whatever you do, probably how important is that you invent, you protect. From a personal perspective, there is no reason why you should not be applying for IP, right? Why you should not be applying for IP? Because you are defining your boundaries. But from a general perspective, from an economic perspective, from a country perspective, from a society perspective, there are arguments for and against. There are a lot of people who believe that it is the IP that actually bring life to the whole invention ecosystem. Right. For example, Abraham Lincoln said patents bring interest to the fire of genius. Right. So so if assume a world where there is no protection for your invention, what is the incentive for somebody to invest in R&D? So you may have something called in economics, we call it a free rider problem, where I use somebody else's effort to my advantage. In that case, nobody will invest in R&D. You will have it. We had a case long back where only government used to invest in R&D, and then the government is not worried about IP. So whatever government R&D is fine, it is available for people. But we are moved away from that stage, and now we know the best of R&D happens in private. Right, COVID vaccine was not invented by a government lab. Right, so when you look at private labs, there has to be some incentive to private labs to invest in R&D. Because if you don't invest in R&D, obviously your economy will not grow. So if you have to encourage investment in R&D, you have to obviously encourage the output of R&D, and that is what patent is. So that is a simple argument for patent. But then there are a lot of criticism. A lot of people argue against IP. There is a good article that you can read in Perfectly Competitive Innovation by Baldwin and Levin, where they're talking about many concerns that are there from a society perspective, from a country perspective. Even now, many of us read newspapers, a lot of debate about, for example, canceling IP for COVID vaccines. Correct? And a lot of argument. India and Africa started it. And surprisingly, even US gave some support to it, which a lot of people found as shocking. Right? So even now the debate is still on. Should we allow two, three companies in the world to monopolize such a very important drug, so thereby preventing access to billions of people across the globe? Right? But then obviously the other part of the story could be that, if that was the case, what are the incentive for those companies to innovate? But then it could be about, reducing monopoly to how long you should allow the monopoly. And biggest concern when patent is granted to a company is that what is the incentive for follow-up research? Because many of the products that we find today are improved versions of the original invention. The original invention was very, very primitive, didn't have much of commercial use, but a lot of people have improved further, invented further, made it better and that is why we have much better, technology. Like, for example, like the open source movement in software development. If that was not there, we will not have many of the great products that we have today. Like, for example, something like an R, business analyst software, right? The kind of improvement that is happening to a software like R is not compared to any proprietary software like SPSS or SaaS that we talk about today, right? Because that would not have been possible if it was a monopoly software. So there are a lot of arguments and examples to show that the monopoly sometimes, hinders future innovation. And another concern would be the misuse of invention, where a lot of companies and individuals get patent for products which are not really novel or innovative, and many of them are actually called the blocking patents, right? You do not want somebody to work on that. You do not want another company to make money out of this. So what you do is at a very basic stage, you just patent it and stop it, and then keep filing cases against others whenever they try to do any work on this. So if you don't use it, you don't let others also use it. And again, how costly it could be if you are going to fight your case in the court for an IP infringement, and that could actually, by itself could be disastrous to you. You will never be able to do that. A problem that many of our startups are facing today. Knowingly or unknowingly, they venture into something, and the moment they are successful, they get a legal notice from an established company saying that you are infringing into our territory. And all the effort and being a startup, surviving very, very with a lot of difficulty, they will not have any money to fight this big company in the court. So they will have no option but to sell it off to the company, or probably obey what they say. So those kind of cases are actually coming up, which could be one of the major criticism of your IP. So generally we talk about something in between, what we'll call the Goldilocks approach, a middle path. The middle path is where you should not have an IP policy which is not very strong nor very weak also. As I said, if it is too strong, it discourages future further innovation. If it is too weak, everybody will violate it, and there is no protection. So probably there should be incentives for innovation. There should be incentives for further innovation also. So that is what we call a balancing act. It could be in terms of reducing the monopoly period. It could be in terms of increasing the renewal fee. If you got a patent every year, you will have to renew your patent by again paying a renewal fee, which also is not a small amount, but then probably you can increase that. So if somebody is just carrying patent just for the sake of it without commercializing it, it could be a disincentive to them. If you have an escalating patent renewal fee from second year to third year, after 5 years could be pretty high. So either you innovate and commercialize it in 5 years, or just throw it open to public so that somebody in the public can actually innovate. There is something called compulsory licensing. Many countries are looking at that as an alternative to the COVID vaccine crisis. As I said, some countries are arguing for not sanctioning patent, which may not be possible. So a lot of countries are talking about compulsory licensing, in the sense, it is your patent, it is your thing, but you have to necessarily give it to anybody qualified asking for a license. You cannot say no to someone. You cannot put a lot of demands on that. So that every country, someone will have the right to manufacture, remaining your product, right? So those kind of middle path approach will have to be negotiated in many cases for us to ensure that the best of inventions become best of innovations as well. Otherwise, they will just remain inventions, patents, but never reaching market. Now, again, university, we have a lot of advantage. We also have some disadvantage when it comes to inventions being commercialized or innovated. As per our rules and policies, as professors, as teachers, as researchers, we are all allowed to invent in our own lab in the sense university labs, department labs. Only condition is that the inventions coming out of our labs should be jointly owned by the university and the inventor. That is a policy, normal policy world across. So you are also a joint owner. University is also a joint owner. But we should call ourselves lucky, because unlike universities, most of the companies they look at employees as working for the company. So any invention coming out of the effort of the employee is normally patented under the company's name. Company owns intellectual property because the philosophy is work for hire. So academics normally different. At least you have a joint ownership, like commercial companies, where it is a company that usually files and gets your patent. But then the problem is like, you know, for an inventor, that, I mean, you may be feeling so comfortable being an academician. As I said, you are a joint owner. But the disadvantage is that many times when we talk to companies for commercialization, when we try to license it, when we try to sell your patent to a company for a deal for commercialization, the moment they know that it's not your individual patent, it's a joint ownership with a government university or a government institution, companies are many times disinterested because they feel some trouble in future, because they know how difficult it is to deal with many government agencies. They feel that after they invest again further research and millions of dollars into following up on your research, suppose the university comes and files a case against you, right? So they may not be very comfortable talking to you alone. So you have to get all government clearance also, because like ours, most of the universities in the country are government universities, government institutions, where the new government can make a change of policy and say that, like, you know, all such patent license license given to companies are cancelled. Then suddenly you again have to go and fight in the court, and it's a very messy affair. So they are more comfortable dealing to a single owner to avoid any conflict and all that. Either private companies, individuals, then they can negotiate and settle this. So it has both plus and minus. Again, as I told you earlier, now more or less summarizing it, idea to product is a very long journey. Let's not underestimate this. So innovation process, basically, as I said, there are 4 stages. What we said, the idea and the concept. Then you develop and design, prototype, pre-production, production, marketing, and commercialization phase. Now, you may get your patent after phase 1 or phase 2. But if you are able to take it to phase 3, it becomes a lot more valuable. Phase 4 is a very challenging process. But if you are looking at phase 4, after you have crossed 1, 2, and 3, then it becomes all the more difficult. But if you had some clarity on phase 4, when you started phase 1, the idea generation, conceptualization, the path or the travel would be a lot more easy. So ideally, we should encourage our researchers to take up ideas with a market in mind. They should be looking at existing problems with the market, existing products, and then start their first phase called idea generation, rather than looking at it after we reach a particular stage. Again, remember, the value of a business definitely depends on the IP, that is idea. But that is probably could be 1 out of those 6 things. It also depends on who is working further on that. A patent by itself may not have a lot of excitement in the market, is valuable, but not necessarily a lot of people are excited. It is really equally important that which is the team owning it, right? Like, you know, even an IP from a faculty from a normal college and an IIT again could be valued different. An IP that is worked further by a team, converting that into a product and converting that into a startup with a very strong foundation. Because I know a startup company run by 3 IIT graduates working on their own invention. They have a patent to it. It is attracting lot of investment from people, because somewhere or other they think it is a very strong team. 3 IIT graduates with their own, you know, patented invention and trying to commercialize. Somewhere or other the world out there feel that they are going to succeed. So who runs it, equally important. Then of course, marketing and search, like what is the expected revenue, what is the kind of market size and competition, etc. How is your product different? They are all very important. So as an inventor, this is my, I think, last slide. As an inventor, you may have to look at all this, right? You have to learn the art of evaluating your invention, both technically and commercially, economic evaluation as well as technical evaluation. You should have access to a legal team like an IPR cell or a legal department which will help you out, because a lot of legal, because you are not talking about rocket science here. Then always be in touch with potential users. Be comfortable pushing it to a prototype stage. Don't stop just because your algorithm got a PhD and then don't stop there. Push it further to at least a prototype stage. And then push whether you can make some presentations and get some interest generated from investors, communities. And then of course, marketing is a completely different world altogether. Publicity is all that matters. Whether how strong or weak is your patent or idea, how much publicity you attract is very important. So in a nutshell, I should say, the role of IP in innovation, if you just ask me, IP has a very, very, very strong support when it comes to your journey of innovation. It is something like a very strong foundation that lay for your house. But unless you build your house on the foundation, it will just remain a foundation. So IP can only be helping you in your journey of innovation. I don't agree with the argument that IP could be sometimes generating disincentives. No, at least the individual level it is. But if you just stop with an IP and expect somebody else to come and innovate on your IP, it is a wishful thinking. It could be difficult. But if you have the energy to push it at least to some stage, as I said, at least till a prototype and an MVP, there could be someone coming and taking the journey, taking the torch from you, and rather baton from you and continuing your race. But at least you should have as inventor, we should have the energy to take it at least to the first milestone and then expect somebody to take it over from you. So these were some general thoughts on that. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can just ask me. The forum is all yours now. Yeah. Any questions, comments for another 5-10 minutes?
Participants, you can ask the questions right now. Either you can type in the chat box.
Yes.
Or you can ask directly. If you have any concerns.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sir, I'm having an idea.
Yeah.
And I want to make it happen.
Okay.
So the very first thing, what I should do and how I can take my idea to implementation. Is there any way, or I can start by myself, or should I get the guidance of any mature businessman? This is my question, sir.
Yeah, it's an easy question, but a very difficult one to answer. As you know, as I was just showing you, idea to product is a long, long journey. But then let's break it down. First is the idea part. First, as I said earlier, you have to be very clear. Are you looking at an idea being commercialized with a business perspective, or are you looking at an idea being converted to an invention and a patent? If you are looking at commercialization, it is a different ball game altogether. Let me ask you: are you looking at a technical idea or a general business idea? What is that? I don't want you to. Pardon?
Commercialization.
No, is that a technical product that you're looking at? Something based on technology or something else?
No, sir, not technology, sir.
Okay. No, if it is not technology, I think the way you get started would be a market study on your own. We will start off with a complete analysis of what is happening now, which are the competitors, what do they offer? Because I'm sure, there could be some companies which are working more or less in line with your idea. Make a list of that and do a detailed analysis. And one thing I always advise is that always find a USP, unique selling proposition. Something that, based on your analysis of the existing products. If you think that, my idea is better, my product is going to be better in 1 or 2, 3 points, write them down. And then talk to people in the market and ask them, are these points interesting? Sometimes you may feel that these are great improvements from my side, and then the whole world will be excited. For example, I remember a startup in Cochin who has spent a lot of money developing a chapati making machine. Right? Chapati making machine where he spent a lot of money perfecting the chapatis, the rotis that you make. Pardon? Somebody is speaking? I don't know, probably forgot to unmute. But then he was spending a lot of time, effort and money in perfecting this product where his concern was to standardize the thickness of the chapati. And to standardize the thickness of the chapati, his machine, he had to redesign 3-4 times. But finally, he realized that is not a big deal. 1 millimeter this side or that side, the thickness of the chapati, the world is not really bothered. So he lost an opportunity. A lot of other players came with the cheaper versions and got the market. So something that he thought was a very important feature was no feature at all, wanted feature for the market. So you write down what you think is the best part of your idea, and then consult with people out there in the market. Check with them whether they are excited about these features. We have a lot of, I mean, I don't know which part you are from. In Kerala, we have Kerala Startup Mission regularly organizing these kind of idea pitching, this thing. I'm sure in your place also you will have something like a business idea pitching competition or idea pitching conferences where we can speak about your idea, because the idea has no patent, right? Idea obviously has no patent. So without disclosing the finite details, you can talk about your idea and check whether people are getting excited. If somebody is excited, then you get a team and you go on there. I know it's a very simple answer, but I mean, that is all I can do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah. What should marketing strategy to sell the product patent to a company? Again, same thing. You may have to see, basically there are multiple ways. One is create visibility. Like for example, when you get a patent, they make a big publicity out of it, right? He is asking about a strategy to sell your patent, right? Big publicity of it. I mean, this is what we do in university. Many times we try to do that. When somebody gets a patent, we make a big news article out of that and get published in a lot of journals or newspapers. So somebody may notice that and call you. Or there are a lot of these kind of conferences where you go and make presentations. Recently, I came across a person from Philips, a senior person who works with their, patent department, where he said they have a team who will regularly go to all these technical conferences, listen to these kind of papers, and anything that they find interesting, they will catch hold of that presenter and start discussion with them. So that is only way out. I mean, without revealing your details, you may have to talk about your product, your patent, in detail, because you can technically reveal the details after you get the patent, but sometimes even if they infringe on your patent, you may not be able to do anything about it. But making it a very interesting story, you will have to present it, and in that process attract people. That is all we can do when it comes to selling. So there is no hard and fast rule on that, but I will say you may have to try out different things. Shall we apply for an Indian patent or international patent? You're meeting a lot of lawyers. As I said, I'm not a patent lawyer, but my understanding is there is nothing called an international patent. It is always country-specific patent. You start off with India, and then probably if you're so confident, you can apply for US patent or European patent. But remember, Indian patent you pay in rupee, international patent you pay in dollars and euros. So you have to be very clear, whether you want to spend that kind of money. If it is only for the sake of getting a patent, it is not really advisable to go with all international countries at that point of time. But if you have a very clear commercialization plan, they may do that. Companies like Samsung and Apple, they apply in all countries. Wherever they market their product, they apply and take the patent, right? But I think if you apply in one country and get a patent, you get some patent protection and all other places also. Your patent experts will clarify that later.
Yeah, sir, just one addition to what you said.
Yes,
so as you rightfully said that
you are there. Radish sir is there. Okay,
rightfully you said there is no international patent. So if you have to gain protection in every country, then you have to file your patent application in those countries. But we have something called as international patent filing mechanism. So it's also called as PCT, or Patent Cooperation Treaty. But then it does not grant an international patent. It's only a filing mechanism wherein you can file an application which gets designated in about 152 member countries, because PCT currently has 152 contracting states. So it's equivalent to filing 152 applications. But then it gives you further time to take a decision on which countries you want to further pursue your invention. So it's not a grant mechanism. After 18 or 19 months, which we normally call as the national phase, you can take a call whether you want to pursue in all those 152 countries, or you only want to pursue in some of the countries wherein, as sir was pointing out, your product may have some commercial value.
Great. Thank you, sir.
There is one more question.
Hello, sir.
One more question by,
sir, yes, sir. Thank you very much for the wonderful session, sir. Sir, as you just mentioned about compulsory licensing, So I was just wondering why India and South Africa are very much focused on IP waiver rather than opting an option which is already there in our IP laws, rather than going for a compulsory licensing.
Sir, should I answer that?
Yeah,
or-
you can answer that. That is
Hmm.
again Dr. Deep's
It's
perspective.
more
Yeah.
of the legal aspect, primarily because if you look at the TRIPS waiver, India and South Africa is pressing for IP waivers in total. So it's not just patents, but also trade secrets, designs, and copyright. So and these vaccines, as you're aware, that most of them are not just protected by patents, but they are also protected by trade secrets. So it could be the cell line that you may be using for developing vaccines, or it could also be the information, the clinical trial data that you may be generating while you are carrying out the safety and efficacy of these vaccines. So those are not there in the public domain. So it's not just patent. And in fact, if you look at the vaccines, these vaccines have been developed in the last 18 months, and the patents have been filed for this, that they are yet to be granted. So these compulsory license mechanisms come into picture only once a patent is granted. So if it's not granted, you cannot use compulsory license. Second, compulsory license is geographical in nature. Particularly in the context of patents. So if you have a patent in India for that vaccine, then you can issue a compulsory license only in India. So then you may not be in a position to market that in countries where there is already a patent for that vaccine. So there are some limitations with the compulsory license mechanism. That's the reason that you find that we are pushing for IP waiver over there, India and South Africa jointly. Yes. So I hope I may have addressed
Thank you
your
very much.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, one question regarding this commercialization of ideas, sir.
Yeah.
Like there is an idea, there is a model, business model,
Okay.
then gestation period, and you
Yeah.
start generating returns,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
So, but if you see these online stuff and all, for example, right from Flipkart, Amazon, the Zomato, you name Ola, whatever be. For example, this Flipkart,
Yeah.
it has been in the market from past 20 years.
Yeah.
And to the best of my knowledge, even in 1 year, they are unable to meet their expenditures,
Correct.
revenues.
Correct.
Then what makes them to sustain, sir? Then it is baffling. For
Very
example,
good
like
question.
it is
Yeah.
as if somebody is, pushing them or want them to be there in the market, whereas they
Well.
are failing. Even if we see capital goods industry or
Hmm.
telecommunication industry, they
Hmm.
need to generate returns,
Hmm.
maybe 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But
Hmm.
these are continuously making losses, and still recently we had an IPO that Zomato something, and it
True.
was successful. And what's this? That is what baffling me, sir. Your idea.
I mean, yes, as it's not just you. A lot of people are talking about it. I don't know. Like as you rightly said, the Zomato had a very successful IPO, 38 times oversubscribed, which made the Goenka Group chairman Harsh Goenka to make a very interesting tweet where they said, okay, if you make 3,000 crore loss a year, you get 1 lakh valuation. So probably, what if you had made 5,000 crore losses? Probably your valuation should have been double. He was just mocking at this whole system. Because see, basically what happens is, in management also, we are all puzzled by this, because something that is driving, there's a basic difference between the profit driven valuation and the future driven valuation, as they call it, because you are only betting for future here. It is only a hope that you are trying to set. For example, like, why do you, I mean, suppose you are looking at buying 10 cents of land in Cochin on the highway side. For 10 years back, I could have got it for 1 lakh a cent. Now I am spending 20 lakhs a cent. After 5 years, it could be 1 crore a cent. So why am I buying this land? What am I buying it for? I don't get any money out of that. There is no cultivation I can do. There is no gold I can mine from that 10 cents of land on the highway. But why is the value going up? Because there is a future expectation that is driving the whole show. The expectation that in future, this will become more valuable. It will turn out to be something good. Somebody may actually use it for a commercial purpose, make a lot of money out of that. And this could help me at this point of time. So they are only driven by hopes and expectations. It is driven by the value that it may reach in future. So what, for example, Zomato is doing is that they are actually, what they're trying to do, for example, Byju's. Byju's app has turned profitable this year, right? And still last year they have been actually running into losses. And people have been investing in Byju's app thinking that one day they will become profitable because this model you are going to accept. They had hopes that people in India sooner or later will go to online education. And if when that happens, being the first mover, with all things being ready, Byju will have a head start. Or like in the case of Zomato, there's the hope that after some time we will all get addicted to online ordering. And that point of time, even when Zomato is making losses now because of two reasons, according to them. One is that the huge discount they offer, because we are all fascinated by the discounts you get when we do online ordering. The second, the kind of expenditure in expanding. They are actually expanding to another 1,000 cities in India this year, and then probably another 2,000, etc. So the hope is that after they reach out to a very small place in India, after they withdraw their discounts, even then people, if they are able to retain that customer base of people ordering with them, right? And then they may become profitable. At that point of time, all their initial expenses are done and they become hugely profitable. But this is only a hope. I mean, there is no guarantee. Unlike a traditional industry where if you're profitable, for example, if you're starting a restaurant here, a physical restaurant, if you cannot say that I may become profitable after 5 years, people will not, buy that theory. The question is, why is that you cannot become profitable this month? If your food is good, if the market is good, if probably you may wait for 5 months for people to get to know about you and then come to you. But nobody will buy the theory that after 5 months people will come to me and I become profitable. No. But in this case, they have a roadmap which says what they call the roadmap to profitability. How they say that their expenses come down proportionately as they expand to new places and their revenues increase, which they are increasing. Earlier they had something like 1 lakh orders a day. Now I think they have something around 30 lakhs orders a day. So they have increased the number of orders a day by 30 times. But their expenses also have gone up by 40, 50 times. That is why they say they're still in losses. But they're visualizing a day when their revenues go much faster than the expenses, and that day they become profitable. And that is an investment for the future. I mean, this is the best I can do. I know this is only selling on hope, right? But if the hope do not materialize, there are n number of cases where companies have collapsed like anything because the hopes do not matter. But in investment companies also, again, I told you, I don't have time to go detail, but the angel investors, mentioned some names like who are actually investing with these kind of startups. They are called the angel investors or venture capitalists. They are risk-taking companies. Their logic is very clear. They invest in 10 companies. One of them make it very big. 9 of them, they lose money. But they make it very big and make it as big where they more than compensate for the 9 losses. It is something like, you make movies. When somebody is making, a producer makes movies, he knows that every movie is not going to be a hit. But he may make 5 movies, assuming that one will become a super bumper hit and all his losses will be compensated. It is a loss that is driving the film industry. Otherwise, if we go by statistics where we read only 10% of the movies actually make money, why should people still be making money? I mean, making movies. So it is a hope that is actually driving, and the risk return paradigm that the people are looking at is slightly different. That is all I can tell you at this point of time.
Thank you.
Shall we close that?
Yeah, I think so. There are no further questions. So we'll move to vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sam sir, for your valuable session. Now I invite S. Jassim, second Sun LLM IT PhD student, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have the duty to deliver the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I would like to thank Professor Sam Thomas, who is a faculty member in School of Management Studies, CUSAT, and he is an expert in management studies. He delivered an excellent talk on role of IP in innovation. He especially mentioned role of IP in innovation and commercialization. After the session, we can understand invention are bedrock of innovation, and invention can used for commercial purpose, and invention can be protected through patent. for a limited period of time. As a result, monopoly right over patented product would help to promote commercialization, thereby ensure innovation and technical growth in a country. And he also pointed out certain criticism too. Avoiding a monopoly to an inventor reduce the incentives for future innovation and all. And the talk was enriched, and of course it was also valuable. All right, because it gave us insight into an unknown domain of role of IP in innovation and commercialization. And special mention should be made about the coordinators of the program too. That was nothing other than the joint venture of IUC IPRS of CUSAT and Atal Academy. So we especially thank them also for the excellent way in with this the program has been coordinated. So I express my deep and sincere gratitude and on behalf of our director and on behalf of all faculty members and research scholars and students gathered here, and on my personal behalf. And moreover, I would like to thank Dr. Asha ma'am and Radish sir for coordinating the sessions. Let similar venture takes place more. Let it enrich our academic expertise. Thank you all.
Thank you.